They didn't even bother pretending it was about performance. At precisely 12:03 p.m. on a Wednesday, I was summoned to the 18th floor executive boardroom of Nova Atlantic Solutions. The sun glared through the panoramic windows as Caleb Rivers, the newly installed vice president of corporate strategy, gestured for me to sit. He didn't offer coffee, no pleasantries, just a single sheet of paper slid across the marble table and 5 words that would unravel nearly a decade of work. We're going in another direction. My name is Adam Carter. I'm 44 years old and had spent the last 8 years steering Nova Atlantic's client relationship division, building partnerships that accounted for almost 38% of the company's annual revenue. I wasn't just a high performer. I was a cornerstone. My calendar was filled with handshakes, red-eye flights, and midnight Zoom calls. Relationships cultivated not with gimmicks or growth hacks, but with trust, real trust. And that trust was about to be handed off to a 26-year-old Ivy League graduate named Dylan Morse, fresh out of business school and, coincidentally, the chairman's nephew. The dismissal wasn't angry. It was cold, sanitized, and efficient. Caleb offered me a generic thank you for your service and a box for my belongings. He didn't know the names of the clients I'd negotiated with, nor the hours I'd spent salvaging contracts during the pandemic. He didn't need to. I wasn't being replaced because I failed. I was being replaced because I had succeeded too well. As I walked past the floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked downtown Chicago, I realized something. This place never belonged to me. I'd only ever rented my seat at the table. With results, with loyalty, with sacrifice. Down at the street level, the wind bit my face as I stepped into the gray February afternoon. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was sharper. Something quieter. More surgical. The kind of pain that doesn't shout, but builds in silence like a storm offshore. I opened my phone and stared at the calendar. 3 major client renewals were due next month, contracts I personally secured. And as far as they knew, I was still the man handling their accounts. But not for long. The day after I was let go, I returned to my apartment with nothing but a half-filled cardboard box and a storm of silence swirling in my mind. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. But even before the formal firing, the slow burn of erasure had already begun. It started weeks prior with little things only someone deeply attuned to corporate politics would notice. First, my access to the client dashboard was restricted. The CRM system I'd helped design, customized with client profiles, notes, and deal stages, was suddenly under review for restructuring. When I flagged the change, I received a templated IT response. Temporary permission shift during migration. Thank you for your patience. Except it never reverted. Then, my name disappeared from company-wide email distributions. I noticed it during a Monday sync when the updated revenue numbers went out. I wasn't CC'd. I asked Valerie, the same accountant who later looked puzzled as I packed my things, if there had been a mistake. She shrugged. I thought you requested to opt out. I hadn't. 2 weeks before the termination, my desk, formerly near the glass wall with a view of the river, was quietly moved to the far end of the floor. Temporary reshuffling for renovations, Caleb explained, smiling. The new space had no window, no natural light, and faced a blank drywall partition. I wasn't given an option. That's when I knew. They weren't planning to fire me publicly. That would have drawn attention. No, they were going to make me disappear first. Systematically isolate me until no one noticed when I was gone. And I played along. Because I was watching. My last few days were a study in corporate dissociation. My meetings were quietly canceled,
Client check-ins were rerouted for support continuity, Caleb claimed, assigning Dylan Morse to shadow a few accounts without telling me in advance. One day, Dylan showed up to a video call I was leading with Greenford Steel, a long-standing $1.2 million contract I had personally rescued during the supply chain crisis. When I asked why he was there, he replied, "Caleb thought it would be good for me to get familiar." That was it. I didn't argue, I simply noted it. The same thing happened with Miratech Group, Polaris Logistics, and Reynard Pharma. Dylan was being handed my client list under the guise of next-gen alignment. He smiled too much during calls, mispronounced client names, and had no industry context. But he wore flashy watches and the chairman's son name tucked into his resume. That was apparently enough. Back at my desk-turned storage closet, I began organizing, but not the way they expected. I pulled out a separate USB I'd kept for personal notes, nothing confidential, just publicly accessible contact details and networking logs. After all, I'd been taught early in my career, never let your network live inside someone else's system. My black notebook, scribbled full of client birthdays, kids' names, pain points, competitor rumors, was already packed in my box. It wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. I also took time to observe the whispers. New hires were flooding in. Shiny suits, flashy degrees, high ambition, but no substance. They gathered in Caleb's office for culture syncs and happy hour planning. No one asked me to join. At first, I felt insulted. Then I felt relieved. I had spent 9 years skipping family holidays to make quarterly goals. Now I was being ghosted out of the system I helped build, and somehow the stillness gave me space to see it clearly. Even the goodbye was muted. No announcement, no farewell email, just the soft thud of a cardboard box on an elevator floor, and a nod from security as I handed in my badge. But that silence, it was my weapon now. Because while they had been slowly cutting me out, they hadn't realized something essential. The relationships weren't stored on their servers. They lived in my phone, my memory, and my character. I hadn't just handled contracts, I'd handled crises. I'd shown up on holidays, negotiated through supplier strikes, saved a failing launch at 2 a.m. with a single well-placed phone call. And the people who mattered remembered that. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and opened my personal laptop. I didn't feel fear, just clarity. The company had removed me, yes, but they had also removed the only glue connecting them to millions in business. They just didn't know it yet. I drafted a simple message, not to send just yet, but to prepare. Just wanted to inform you I'm no longer with Nova Atlantic. It's been an honor working together, and I appreciate the trust you have placed in me all these years. I'll share more details once I land somewhere that can serve you with the same integrity. No drama, no bitterness, just facts. Delivered with the quiet professionalism they had underestimated. And when I pressed save, I smiled. Not because they made a mistake, but because they had no idea how big that mistake truly was.
I remember the first time I walked into the lobby of Riverbend Industries. It was winter. Snow clung to the soles of my shoes, and the receptionist looked confused when I arrived unannounced at 7 a.m., hours before any scheduled meeting. But that day, their distribution system had crashed, and I'd caught wind of it the night before through a casual dinner with one of their regional leads. I showed up
Not with a pitch, but with hot coffee and backup solutions already drafted. That was how it began. Over the years, Riverbend, Granson Group, and Helix Retail didn't just become clients. They became partners. People. Names. Families. I'd celebrated births, mourned losses, and negotiated deals over barbecue in backyards, not just in glass boardrooms. So when I finally hit send on the messages I'd drafted the night before, I wasn't just updating them on a career change. I was informing people who trusted me that the line they relied on had shifted. Each email was short, personal, and direct. Hi, Marcus. Just a quick heads up. As of yesterday, I'm no longer with Nova Atlantic. It's been an absolute privilege supporting your team, and I'll keep you posted as things unfold. Grateful for all we've built. I didn't ask for anything. No promises, no passive-aggressive digs. I simply told the truth and stepped back. And the responses? Immediate. Marcus from Granson Group replied within 5 minutes. Wait, what? Who's our new contact? This isn't okay. Natalie from Helix was more direct. You're the reason we renewed this year, not the firm. You. What's going on? They were stunned. Not because corporate turnover was rare, it wasn't, but because no one told them. These were contracts worth millions, yet no courtesy call, no transition briefing, no introduction to a replacement. It wasn't just a misstep, it was insulting. That afternoon, I received a call from Paul Gallagher, Riverbend's COO. His voice, usually warm, had an edge to it. Is it true you're out, Cole? I asked. Yes, I said simply. Effective yesterday. They didn't even loop us in. We've got a multi-year agreement tied directly to your team. It's out of my hands now, Paul. Well, it won't be out of ours. I didn't have to say more. These weren't just vendors. They were relationships forged in midnight calls and on-site problem-solving, not just quarterly forecasts. Nova Atlantic's leadership had no idea what they just severed. Later that evening, I took out my handwritten ledger. It wasn't fancy, just a black moleskine filled with names, project dates, client quirks, and notes about every challenge I'd helped navigate. It was my legacy, and Nova couldn't touch it. That night, the calls didn't stop. Riverbend's legal counsel reached out to Nova, demanding clarity on account servicing. Granson Group put their renewal under internal review. And Helix, they postponed their expansion deal, citing recent instability in account management. In less than 24 hours, $7 million in active or upcoming contracts were shaken, not because I sabotaged anything, but because no one had been prepared for the human element. Caleb and the executive team had spent months crafting a narrative of scalability and data efficiency, pushing junior reps into senior meetings, investing in flashy automation. But they'd forgotten something fundamental. Trust isn't scalable, it's earned. And I'd earned it. They thought they could replace that with younger faces, buzzwords, and performance dashboards. But those tools didn't hold Natalie's hand when Helix faced a cyber breach. They didn't personally drive to Riverbend's warehouse in a snowstorm when logistics broke down. They didn't stay up till 3 a.m. with Marcus negotiating a time-sensitive supplier switch when the European market fell apart. I did. And the clients remembered. By the third day, I was fielding quiet offers. Firms I'd once competed with were reaching out through back channels, offering roles, advisory positions, and most tempting of all, ownership stakes. One email read, "We've admired your client-first approach for years. You've built something remarkable. If you're open to a conversation, let's talk equity." I paused. For the first time in years, I wasn't just valuable, I was valued. That was when I realized Nova hadn't fired a problem. They'd released an asset they couldn't measure. They looked at charts and projections and decided that the face of $15 million in business wasn't hungry enough. They had no idea that I hadn't just maintained those numbers, I'd protected them, quietly absorbing every fire, diffusing every threat, keeping clients loyal in a market where churn was the norm. And I did. And the clients remembered. I turned off my phone, sat back, and let it sink in. This wasn't loss. This was leverage. And I was just getting started. By the third morning after my termination, I had already lost count of how many texts and emails were piling into my personal phone. The industry was buzzing. News spreads fast when a key account executive like me suddenly disappears without warning, especially when over a dozen of the region's top-performing accounts are left hanging. But I didn't posture. I didn't rant online. I didn't call up Caleb or anyone from Nova Atlantic demanding explanations. That wasn't my style. Instead, I did what I've always done. Handled things with quiet precision. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, opened my personal laptop and pulled out my notebook. Old school, yes, but filled with more trust equity than any CRM Nova had ever built. My plan wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I began with the 3 clients I had the deepest ties to: Marcus from Grandson Group, Paul from Riverbend Industries, and Natalie from Helix Retail. Each had built their business side by side with me for over half a decade. These weren't transactional relationships. These were real partnerships grounded in consistency, problem-solving, and a human voice on the other end of the phone. The calls were short and respectful. I wasn't asking for business. I wasn't offering anything. I simply said, I wanted you to hear it from me. As of this week, I'm no longer with Nova Atlantic. It's been a privilege serving your team all these years. The response was identical across all 3 calls. Stunned silence, then frustration, followed by an immediate question. So, where are you going next? Because wherever it is, we want to follow. I paused, not out of hesitation, but because that moment, that split second before answering, was confirmation that everything I had built wasn't just real. It was transferable. These weren't Nova Atlantic's clients. They were mine. Because trust doesn't sign a corporate contract. It walks hand in hand with people. I'm taking a breath, looking at my options, but I'll let you know the moment I land. That night, all 3 sent formal notices to Nova's legal department, citing change in key relationship management as grounds for pausing all contract negotiations. No accusations, no legal threats, just business. And a clear signal that Nova had underestimated how deep the roots ran. By the next afternoon, I received a call from Sterling and Bell, a boutique consultancy I'd admired for years. Small, sharp, and fiercely client-focused. Their managing partner, Diane Lawson, got straight to the point. Cole, we heard you're a free agent, and 3 of your biggest clients just dropped our competitors' names and yours in the same breath. Let's talk. The offer she put on the table was simple. Senior partner, full autonomy, performance-based equity. I didn't say yes immediately. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I needed to make one thing clear. I don't want to be a trophy hire. I want to build. I want to protect relationships, and I want a seat at the table, not just a corner office. Diane laughed. That's exactly why we called. Within 48 hours, I signed. Sterling and Bell didn't want flash. They wanted foundation. And I brought that with me, client by client, phone call by phone call. Not through pressure, not through seduction, but through transparency. I'm with a new firm now. No obligations, but if you'd like to continue working together, I'd be honored. The answers? Send the paperwork. Let's schedule the onboarding. Welcome home. By the end of that week, $6.8 million in annual contracts had moved, not because of legal battles or discount wars, but because I'd never treated my clients like assets. I treated them like people. And now, They were treating me the same way. Nova tried to stop the bleeding, of course. I received a message from Caleb on Friday evening. We're open to a consulting arrangement, maybe help transition the accounts for a retention package. I didn't reply. You don't build 9 years of trust, cut it at the knees, and then ask for a favor when the ground starts to crumble. Besides, it was already too late. I walked into the Sterling and Bell office on Monday morning with a fresh ID badge, a new desk, and full control over my own department. I wasn't rebuilding. I was evolving. And it didn't take long for the phones to ring again. The rest of the industry was watching. By the second week, 5 more companies reached out. Clients who hadn't even been part of my initial circle but had heard about the transition. The whispers turned to calls. Calls into meetings, and meetings into signed agreements. One thing was now undeniable. Nova hadn't fired a problem. They had freed a movement.
By the 3rd week, the storm had settled, but I was only just getting started. My transition to Sterling and Bell had already reshaped the local market narrative. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about agency. Something I hadn't realized I'd surrendered until Nova yanked it from under me. Just when I thought I'd hit my stride, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. Subject: Regional Leadership Opportunity. Orion Executive Solutions. I almost dismissed it. Orion was a lean, high-performance consultancy I'd only heard about in passing. They had no bloated hierarchy, no shiny skyscraper office, just smart people solving hard problems. But what caught my eye wasn't the title, it was the tone. We don't hire performers. We invite partners. Let's talk about building something together. The email was signed by Naomi Cross, their COO. Out of curiosity, or maybe instinct, I accepted the meeting. We met in a modest workspace overlooking the east side of the city. No marble floors, no company-branded mugs, just a round table, a whiteboard, and Naomi. She offered no pitch, no slideshow. She asked me one question. What would you do if no one could fire you ever again? I sat back, stunned for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I'd build a team that never has to beg for credit. I'd protect trust over speed. And I'd make sure no one feels replaceable just because they're consistent. Naomi smiled. That's what we do here. And we want you to do it with us. Within days, Orion extended an offer not as an employee, but as regional director and equity partner in progress. It was more than a title. It was ownership. I left Sterling and Bell on the best terms. Diane understood. We knew you wouldn't stay long. You're not a chapter. You're a publisher. And just like that, I stepped into the biggest move of my career, not with a raise, but with freedom. Orion didn't onboard me. They unleashed me. My first act as regional director was calling every client who'd followed me through the chaos. This time, I didn't just offer service. I offered a seat at the table. I asked questions no firm had ever asked them. How do you want to grow? What kind of partnership do you deserve? What does peace of mind mean to you in this economy? The response was overwhelming. They weren't just renewing contracts, they were expanding them. By the end of my first quarter, I had migrated over $2.5 million in annual contracts to Orion. But more importantly, we converted those deals into long-term collaborations. No churn, no false urgency, just real compound trust.
clients began referring other companies not because of discounts or perks, but because they could see the difference. Service levels went up, response times dropped, and for the first time in a long time, I could walk into a strategy meeting and feel like I had nothing to prove, only value to deliver. Inside Orion, I wasn't asked to follow a script. I was given a canvas, and I painted with everything Nova once called too soft: empathy, loyalty, long-game thinking. In our weekly leadership huddles, Naomi would turn to me and ask, "What are you building this month?" Not, "How are you performing?" Not, "How many new leads?" That changed everything. I brought in 2 former colleagues who'd been edged out by Nova's acquisition strategy. I gave them contracts with profit sharing built in. No one on my team would ever have to fear being too consistent again. Then came a quiet moment. Sitting alone in my new office late at night, staring at the city lights. No emails, no buzz, just the hum of peace. I realized something profound. I didn't just change jobs, I reclaimed my name. I wasn't someone's number anymore. I was a builder again, a builder with keys to his own house. That's what empowerment really is. It's not a promotion or applause. It's being able to say, "No one owns me," and still delivering excellence on your terms. Nova's legal team did reach out one final time, something about lingering obligations. I forwarded it to Orion's general counsel, who replied with a single line: "We don't fight ghosts." Perfect.
In the end, I didn't need fireworks. I didn't need revenge speeches or courtroom drama. What I needed and finally found was peace. Nova Atlantic's collapse wasn't my victory parade. It was a consequence of arrogance. When they treated trust as a transaction, they underestimated the power of relationships. In the span of 6 months, their stock plummeted, their client roster unraveled, and their shiny offices became echo chambers of regret. Caleb Rivers disappeared from industry conferences, while his nephew was quietly reassigned. Their empire wasn't stolen, it simply evaporated because it was built on borrowed trust. Meanwhile, at Orion, I thrived. Not because I outperformed anyone, but because I was finally allowed to build without fear. My name became associated with loyalty, reliability, and quiet resilience. I was invited to speak at the National Client Strategy Conference, a full-circle moment that reminded me of everything I nearly lost. As I stood on stage, I didn't speak of betrayal. I spoke of the cost of undervaluing people. I watched Caleb from the back of the ballroom, face pale, eyes heavy, not with anger, but with understanding. He finally saw what he threw away. And I had finally let it go. The real lesson wasn't about career politics or legal contracts. It was about identity. I used to think my job defined me. Now I know it's the relationships I nurture, the integrity I protect, and the freedom I fight for that define me. So to anyone out there who's ever been discarded, sidelined, or made to feel like your loyalty is weakness, listen closely. You're not replaceable. Your consistency is your superpower. Your kindness isn't naive. And one day, they'll realize they didn't just lose an employee. They lost the heart of the operation. You don't need to burn bridges to rise. Sometimes, all you have to do is walk forward without looking back and let your value speak louder than any retaliation ever could.
If this story moved you or reminded you of your own journey, drop a comment below. What moment in your life made you reclaim your worth? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, real justice, and emotional redemption. Your support helps this channel grow and reminds others they're not alone.